Now then, how are you getting on? What does a 1970s Elvis Presley gospel album have in common with a 1960s jazz album by John Coltrane? Well, most obviously, they were both made by American men. Less obviously, they both praise God. They also have one more thing in common, and I'm going to come back to that later in the video, because today I'm going to be talking about Elvis's gospel albums and how they were sold in Japan. Now, you might think that there'd be little or no market for gospel music in Japan, but there are Christians living here, and in fact, even in the city where I live, a city of about 300,000 people, there are more than a dozen churches within a fairly short drive from where I live. And of course, you don't have to be a Christian to enjoy Elvis's gospel music. Now, when they released Elvis's gospel albums in Japan, they changed the titles of the album so they sounded less religious. And I'm going to show you what I mean by that. So let's go right back to the first gospel album from 1960-61, His Hand in Mine. Now, this album, the title of this album comes from a song on the album itself. Now, the song, His Hand in Mine, is translated into Japanese as basically the same as English, His Hand in Mine. But the title of the album in Japanese has a completely different translation, a different meaning. And it's printed at the top of the obi there. And basically, in English, the title of His Hand in Mine, the Japanese album, is Home of the Heart, or Homeland of the Heart, something like that. So you can see that that's a much less religious title than His Hand in Mine. It's not overtly religious. The second gospel album, released in 1967, was How Great Thou Art, and the title of this album also comes from a song on the album. And again, the title of the song, How Great Thou Art, is basically the same in Japanese as it is in English. However, the title of the album itself was changed to Golden Hymns. So it doesn't sound quite as religious as How Great Thou Art. Okay, it's, it mentions the word hymn, golden hymns, and they are religious songs, of course. But I think by calling them golden hymns, it makes it sound a little bit more commercial, a little bit less religious somehow. And that brings us back to this album here, He Touched Me, Elvis's fourth gospel album. Now, this is another one which has an album title which comes from a song on the album itself. Now, the song title in Japanese is slightly different to the English one. It basically translates as Led by the Hand of God, something like that. However, the title of the album, again, is very different from the English title of the album. And this time they translated it as A Love Supreme, which is, of course, the title of this album here by John Coltrane. Now, this album translated into Japanese was the same, A Love Supreme, which is the same title. So in Japanese, the third thing they have in common is they have the same title. Here in Japanese for the Elvis album, and here in Japanese for the Coltrane album. Now, you might say, well, why did they translate this one as is, but not this one? Well, I think it's because A Love Supreme, although this album is also praising God, the words A Love Supreme are not as obviously religious as He Touched Me. So they were able to translate this album as it was. But this one, they must have deemed too Christian sounding, too religious sounding. So they gave it the title A Love Supreme. To show you a similar example, after Elvis died, RCA released this gospel compilation here, He Walks Beside Me. Now, obviously there's no song called He Walks Beside Me, but they had to translate the title into Japanese. And what they did with this one, the title of the album in Japanese is something like Journey of the Heart. Again, which doesn't sound religious at all. And there is another album with this exactly the same title in Japanese. This is James Taylor's first album from 1969. Now, this album was just called James Taylor in English. They could, of course, have just called it James Taylor in Japanese phonetics, and that's what they did with the CD when the CD eventually came out. But with the album, when it first came out, they called it Journey of the Heart. So it has exactly the same title as He Walks Beside Me. So on the right side of the Elvis Obi is the Japanese title here. On the left side of the James Taylor Obi, exactly the same title. So this is not a religious album at all. This one is, but they've given it a more secular sounding title, Journey of the Heart. And of course there was one more gospel album, You'll Never Walk Alone. Now what they did with the title of You'll Never Walk Alone, the song and the album, was they basically used the English title, although using Japanese phonetics. So it sounds You'll Never Walk Alone in Japanese. Now the title of the song, You'll Never Walk Alone, is not obviously religious, and even the lyrics themselves, you can interpret them in a secular way if you want to. So I think it was fairly safe for them to translate this album, the title of this album, as is. So I think you can see there that what the Japanese record company did was they played down the religious nature of those albums by changing the titles to make them sound more secular. Now you might think that's a terrible thing to do, but personally I have no problem with it. It's really just the same thing that they did in America, but in reverse. So in America, they deliberately chose very religious sounding titles to emphasize the Christian nature, the religious nature of the content, in order to sell those records. Whereas in Japan, they did the exact opposite and de-emphasized the Christian nature of the material, again, in order to sell the records to the Japanese customers. So it's basically two different approaches to the same thing. The goal ultimately was just to sell the records. But what do you think? Do you think they should have kept the titles as they were, or were they right to change them for the Japanese market? Let me know what you think. Thanks for watching. Take care.